Hey everyone, Nathan Long here, president of Saybrook University. Welcome to another episode of Saybrook Insights. In this session from our recent President's Symposium on Integrative Mental Health, we learn about the differences between burnout and secondary trauma. Truly, truly enlightening. Doctors Brown and Nguyen introduce current research on the phenomena of burnout and secondary trauma. You'll learn about skills necessary to recognize symptoms of burnout and secondary trauma and explore ways to alleviate those symptoms in themselves and others. Check it out, a very powerful, informative session. And if you missed it last week, we had a very special panel presentation featuring three nationally and internationally known guests talking about the state of integrative mental health. All right, here we go.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. My name is Trent Nguyen, along with Dr. Stephen Brown. We will be presenting on burnout and secondary traumatic stress disorder. So a bit about myself. I'm the chair of the Ph.D. in Integrative Social Program at Saybrook. We did launch this program 3 years ago. I have been in this field since 1998, working with various populations from domestic violence perpetrators as well as victims, kids who have been in foster care, have been abused sexually, emotionally, physically, as well as youth who were sex offenders in a lockdown facility. So I have not seen any of these incidents firsthand. But through these clients, I mean, some of these images, these stories are still with me to this very day. So I would like to hand over to Dr. Stephen Brown to introduce himself.
All right, thank you for having me this morning. My name is Stephen Brown. I am former Associate Dean of Students and now Associate Professor at Cal Baptist University. My background is really, I've worked in child welfare for probably almost 15, 16 years now, and that's where I got my start. And really my first true exposure to secondary trauma and a lot of the framework and the reference that I'll be making to our presentation today. So just a little bit about me, but Dr. Nguyen, if you'd like to kick us off, we can get rolling.
Okay, so yes, this program is for you. This session is for you, and you can jump in anytime, chime in anytime you wish, so that we can have a dialogue. All right. So let me start with this slide here. Okay, so let me begin by saying that as airline passengers are advised, if you are traveling with a person who needs help, adjust your own oxygen mask first, even if you are traveling with a child. And I think, natural indication, right, is to reach over and put that oxygen mask on the child first. But here we are advised to put our own oxygen mask first, because we cannot help anybody if we are down. So that's the importance of understanding burnout, secondary trauma, and to realize what we can do to prevent as well as alleviate some of the symptoms we may find ourselves having them or our colleagues, and how to help the situation.
Looking at secondary trauma and traumatic stress disorder, it's important to note that we're talking about indirect exposure to trauma through a firsthand account. A lot of these symptoms, as you can see, include things that are similar to PTSD, which are hyperarousal, avoidance, etc. And we're also going to delve a little bit into compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue, when I initially heard the term, it was like a person that cared too much. but it's really a lot deeper than that. And we will delve a little bit more into that as we go. So next slide.
Right. If I could say that Charles Figley, he is the University of New Orleans right now. He is like a giant in this field. Based on his own compassion fatigue and a lot of studies that he has done over the decades. So just to the name, Charles Figley, and the one who came up with the term compassion fatigue. And as time progresses, people look at whether it is compassion fatigue or empathetic distress fatigue. So we'll look at the differences between the two later on, all right? Okay, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, empathetic distress fatigue. So if you look in the literature, you will see these terms. And the main thing with research in this area is that it is less than if you were to look at primary PTSD. Okay, for various reasons. When I was in graduate school, we did not talk about taking care of ourselves. The focus was always on the client, to do your best. And if something was not right, then we would have like all kinds of self-doubt. Am I fit to help these populations? Am I supposed to be in this helping profession? So again, the focus was always on the other. And if something, were to happen to us, if you believe it, social workers for the most part, if they encounter compassion fatigue, for example, empathetic distress fatigue, less likely that they tend to seek help. And some studies have demonstrated that they tend to drink, for example, engage in some types of addictive behaviors. And the last thing is to seek help, to reach out to a colleague. So these terms refer to conditions in which helping professionals develop PTSD-like symptoms from exposure to clients' traumatic incidents. And like I said, I have not seen these traumatic incidents firsthand, but especially with kids, is that, when I work with kids, barriers tend to come down very easily. And that boundaries in terms of taking in all of this information, all of the details, very graphic details. And we cannot not be impacted by those types of stories. So they can be a result of exposure to many types of traumatic events that professional helpers hear about from clients: sexual assault, abuse, domestic violence, neglect, children, spousal neglect, financial devastation, and much more. And I think that students may be very gung-ho, right, entering this profession. And when the rubber hits the road, for example, like internship level, they begin to have this kind of like real life, hands-on experience with real clients, with real problems. And you can see their energy level decreases. And they may not understand why. They say, hey, this is my passion to be in this helping profession. Why is my energy so low? Why do I avoid people? Why do I get so tempered with people? And the main thing too is that we have to realize that, hey, this is what you have been exposed to. And perhaps let's process that. All right. Dr. Brown, anything that you would like to add?
Yes, I think it's also important to note that having worked as Associate Dean of Students, we saw that earlier and earlier in students as well, not just folks that were working in the profession, but students were experiencing this while they were going through their graduate studies. Once you were incorporating their studies and an internship, we saw students that didn't realize, and maybe it was good that they saw this in school as opposed to in their professional setting, but they realized that they had some triggers to witnessing some of these events that they hadn't adequately dealt with from their own childhood, for example, or even into adulthood, that created some post-traumatic stress-like symptoms for them while they were in grad school. So we had to do several interventions on students that didn't realize that they would be impacted as heavily as they were, just from some of the course material, incorporating their field practicum into that, and really having to deal with some serious issues sooner rather than later. It was a good thing for them, but I think those are some of the things that can't be understated when you're talking about the effects of secondary trauma and how it can impact not only the helping professional, but the student as well.
Sure. Yeah, and if you think about students, they gravitate towards the populations that
Correct.
they identify with. Okay, perhaps same abuse, same phenomenon that they had gone through themselves, and they gravitate towards those populations. And because of that over-identification with their clients, I mean, it is so easy to take that client story, with them, to take that client home, okay, in their mind, right? And that has a tremendous impact. So perhaps, at Saybrook, the focus is on retention. Yeah, so if students do go out there and have these experiences with these clients, and they are being impacted, and I think for the most part, they would not come to us and say, hey, I don't know why, I feel so demotivated. I look at the issues that are around us. It is just unbearable. Okay, so again, that is a huge indication for us to reach out as educators. Okay, and looking at from that lens that all students may have precarious trauma, empathetic distress, fatigue.
Really just looking at some of the effects of secondary traumatic stress and vicarious trauma, and some of these images in terms of early on in my career, I didn't quite understand what that fatigue was. I just thought it was just maybe I wasn't getting enough sleep, or maybe, my diet is off, or some of the things I really didn't have the acumen to really understand what was happening to me. And as Dr. Nguyen had alluded to, we really weren't given these tools going through graduate school before, or even in our professional training. When I started with the LA County Department of Children and Family Services. I didn't have any of these tools. They didn't talk to us about vicarious trauma. They didn't talk to us about secondary traumatic stress. They didn't talk to us about self-care. They didn't talk to us about burnout. They just gave us the information that we needed to do our jobs and send us on our way. So you could make the case very clearly that we were ill prepared for what we were about to encounter. And really, ill prepared is not even it's really kind of an understatement. We weren't given this knowledge at all. So we didn't know what this was. And we essentially were sort of hit by this train that was vicarious trauma and secondary traumatic stress that I now know. But at that time, it was just, hey, I really am struggling getting out of bed. I do not want to go to work today. It is a chore for me to just put clothes on and to go into this place. And I don't know what this is. I don't know what I'm feeling, but
right.
You either push through, or you just sort of called in sick that day. But one or the other had to happen. And I realized pretty quickly that I couldn't get through my day that way, because the decisions that I would be needing to make during the course of a day could be life and death decisions for a child. So I couldn't come in and be less than my best self. And I couldn't come in and give a half effort just based on how I felt that day, because my energy wasn't where it needed to be. So I had to really do some things to take a step back, because I wasn't as clear in my younger days about the true impact of the decisions that I was making on a day-to-day basis, and how it could impact families and children's lives. So I really needed to do some deep dives with where I was and the things that I needed to be in order to be my best self. And one of those was really focusing on this self-care piece that we'll talk about a little bit today as well. But if there's anyone, I see some things in the chat about relating to these images. And I see Lacey, the comment by Lacey, as well as the comment before from Eileen. And, I can identify with this because of 22 years of public teaching and 22 years of ministry. Definitely another very, I don't want to say high stress, but highly prone to traumatic stress and vicarious trauma as well. So if there's any comments or anything that anyone else would like to add in terms of completely relating to these pictures or understanding where we're coming from, please feel free.
So Stephen, if I could ask you,
Yes.
Let's say that when you were with the LA County, right, and then you experienced all these symptoms,
Yes.
what prevented you from, let's say, seeking a supervisor and say, hey, I don't know why I feel so demotivated, de-energized?
I didn't think of it as a supervisory issue. I thought that was more of a me issue, right? More of a thing of, this is something that I'm dealing with, and it felt to me that I looked to the left or the right and I didn't see anyone else dealing with it. So I thought it was just me. Like maybe I needed vitamins. I don't know what it was, but at 25, 26, I was trying to make sense of it the best I knew, but I really wasn't given the tools to do so. But no, I didn't think of it as a supervisory issue. And honestly, it wasn't until I started talking to my colleagues and I realized that others were sort of experiencing the same thing, that I realized that this wasn't, something that was uncommon and unique to just me. This was a more widespread issue that needs to be discussed and talked about. So we used to get together and we sort of informally created like help groups and support groups for ourselves to sort of work through some of these issues, because other than that, I don't think we would have survived, because we were really thrown into the abyss, if you will, and saw some things that as a 25-year-old, you just shouldn't see, fresh out of graduate school, and having to work through those things and help families work through those things and still be yourself and still be a husband or a dad when you at the end of the day, and come and still be available for your family when you got done with that day, and how we were able to sort of compartmentalize what we experienced from 8 to 5 that day, and then switch hats and become someone else, or the person that our family needed us to be from 5 to the next day was tough. So those were the things that we discussed and really worked through as a group to begin to try to make sense of the things that we were experiencing, but more importantly, to normalize our feelings around these things, and really have each of us realize that, no, what we're experiencing is normal. The things that we are being exposed to is what's abnormal. It's not our reaction to it. It's the things that we've been exposed to is what's abnormal. And our reactions to it are completely normal if we are feeling human beings and really connecting with the stories and the concerns and the trauma that our clients are experiencing.
Okay, trauma held within the body from someone else's life experiences. And just know that our body keeps score. Okay, no doubt about that. And the implication is that we all have limits. If I were to see, let's say that 8 trauma cases back to back, and to be compassionate, to be effective, we actually put ourselves in the client's shoes. just imagine going through, a loss, the grieving process, and how that impacts us. So again, our body keeps score, and we tend to carry these trauma cases with us. It impacts our physical health. The stress hormone may be elevated for a long, long time. Again, I think that, when educating students, right, to let them realize that, hey, it is okay for you to reach out to others. And we are in this helping profession together. Anything that you would like to add, Steve?
Well, actually just responding to Lacey's comment, she says she's seen that with a lot of new clinicians, right, in terms of more seasoned clinicians are choosing to refrain from taking more serious cases because of the self-care piece. And very astute, and I have seen that a lot, where essentially the newer clinicians who don't have as much seniority, for example, they don't have as much say on the cases that they're assigned. So they have to sort of work through those cases. I remember very, very clearly as a young clinician getting the sexual abuse cases and all the things that were a lot more heavy, that a lot of the more senior clinicians who had some say in the cases that they accepted and took would stay away from. So it seemed like it would really be more of the opposite, but it wasn't. So the less seasoned and less experienced clinician was kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool to sort of work through a lot of these issues. But it left us with some of the same things we were talking about before, some of that secondary vicarious trauma, because we were experiencing things that we didn't have the skill set to necessarily even work through. But more importantly, we were experiencing things that we probably shouldn't have at such an early point in our professional careers as well. That should have been the exact opposite, but it wasn't that way for us as we entered into the field.
Right. Yeah, in the last session, we talked about the interconnectedness between mind, body, and spirit. I mean, no doubt that if our physical health is impacted, it also impacts our emotional health. It impacts our spirituality. I mean, we don't want to meditate, for example. We don't want, to take care of our health. We don't want to eat healthy, for example, okay, because we become, for example, let's say, emotional eaters. Mm. So all of those implications, and I think the essence is that one has to realize, okay, that the profession is impacting them, and what are some of the resources that they can get to get the help that they need. Because again, I mean, in order to stay vibrant and effective in this profession, we have to really address this. Otherwise, it is not sustainable at all.
I'm just curious, any suggestions as to how to reduce the burden of the scores the body is holding, especially for those of us who have been dealing with human issues for a long time? Aside from meditation, any new techniques, any new innovations to consider to kind of cleanse the system, make it a little lighter?
Sure. Right. For me personally, is that processing these cases, these stories with colleagues. Okay, those who can identify with what you are going through. I mean, that is like a tremendous help for me, because you do not feel isolated. Okay, you do, especially for those who are in private practices. I mean, it can be a very lonely place, because again, you see clients on a daily basis, and it is like a one-way intimacy. Okay, meaning that, hey, they come in and they dump all of these issues, all these trauma, and then you are the ones that take in all of their traumatic experiences. And those have to be released somewhere, and that's why I have colleagues in the field so that, you can process these things, you can support one another. And by hearing yourself talk and seeing yourself process, I mean, that is tremendous help, versus let's say you see 8 trauma cases, 8 trauma clients, and then you go home and without, again, processing that with anybody, and you can, that is not sustainable at all, because you do have limits. And we're going to look at the implications, later, in terms of having, compassion fatigue and how that impacts the clients that you see, especially if they bring in more trauma. Okay, and you can no longer be empathetic. You can no longer be compassionate and effective in your profession. Anything that you would like to add, Stephen?
Yes, I think one technique that I've seen and that I personally implement is really unplugging. I got that from a good friend of mine who still works in child welfare to this day. And one of the things that he does is he stores up literally as much vacation time as he can muster, and all the overload and all the things that he can do. And he literally unplugs for, I think, almost 2 months a year. He'll store it up and take like a 2-month vacation where he just completely unplugs. He completely goes off the grid. He doesn't answer his cell phone. He doesn't check emails. He doesn't do anything work related for that entire 2 months. And he kind of jokes and says, literally, when I come back, I don't remember my sign on. I don't remember my password. I don't remember anything. And it works for him. He's been in child welfare now for over 20 years. And this is just one of the strategies that he uses. And, I caught myself years ago. I think I tried it, and I unplugged for some time, and I took a long-term sub job as a PE teacher. Mm-hmm. I still say to this day, that was the coolest job I ever had. I got to wear shorts to work, and they gave me a whistle. Right, so I got a chance to walk around, but it completely cleansed me from some of the trauma that I had been experiencing. Right, so it sort of allowed my body to sort of hit the reset button, and it gave me a renewed sense of purpose for when I did come back, because I had sort of flushed myself, if you will, or done like a secondary trauma fast. And got some of this stuff out of my system for a while, and allowed my body to just sort of reset and to heal itself. And the body will do that if you give it the opportunity. But it's just like eating bad food. If you keep eating it and keep feeding yourself that food, and you don't give your body a chance to rest, it will come out in the way of compassion fatigue and some of the other things that you see. But this is one of the ways that I have done it, and it's worked well for me, and I know a lot of other colleagues that have used it successfully as well.
Sure. Yeah, I would say that if you see, changes in your personality, let's say that you are usually easygoing, like a jokester, for example, like to crack jokes. And then when you are with other people, now you are very serious, very preoccupied. Just know that is a huge indication right there. And don't lose the sense of humor, because that really helps tremendously. And I think that, when we begin to really realize that, right? Say, hey, I don't want lose that part of my personality. I can socialize with other people and all that. And I think for the most part, people that are not in the field, they are not thinking about these issues. And we are, right? Because we get to see that on a daily basis, and that is like our preoccupation. And we may be thinking that, hey, do you realize that kids are being abused, and why are you laughing? Why are you joking now? Because again, they are not in the field, with us. But we do need that, that time to socialize with other folks, just to realize that, hey, besides being in the helping profession, besides all of these issues, right? I mean, there's also life too, and I am part of that, friendship with those people. So. Okay, so now we'll look at the differences between secondary trauma and burnout. People may be confused. Okay, am I being burnout or do I have secondary trauma? How can you tell? Okay, so if you look at burnout, is like a gradual process. Okay, so it's not like you show up one day at your new job and then you get burned out. It doesn't happen like that. But secondary trauma does happen like that. Okay, a while back I had a student, her first internship, wanting to work with kids. And she showed up. And her first client, 13 years of age, 3 months pregnant. And she was blown away by that image. She could not, imagine that she would encounter a 13-year-old girl being pregnant. And she found out too, and this was real sad too, is that she was raped. And the guy who impregnated her, skipped the country, was nowhere to be found. And that image, stayed with her. Injustice. Okay. And this young lady, did not understand what was happening inside of her body. And again, how can you not take that home with you? Okay. So secondary or vicarious trauma differs from burnout is that it involves exposure to emotionally trying images and descriptions of suffering. It also involves patterns of re-experiencing clients' trauma, avoidance, numbing, and persistent arousal. And it's not a gradual process like burnout. That's the main thing. If you can see your energy level drops day in, day out, day in, day out. Anything, Stephen, that you would like to add?
Yeah, I think burnout, I love the concept of it being a gradual process because it is. They say like high blood pressure is like a silent killer. I think burnout is sort of similar to that, right? In terms of it being something that sneaks up on you gradually. You don't realize that it's happening until it's there a lot of times. Unlike some of the vicarious trauma and secondary trauma, I liken it to when things happen that are almost instantaneous. A personal story, as a college student, I was robbed on campus, right? And robbed at gunpoint, pistol whipped, and it scarred me immediately. Right? It wasn't something that was gradual. It was something that immediately left me traumatized, and I struggled with going to class. I struggled with being out at night. I struggled with being in crowds. I struggled with a lot. And this was, I think I was maybe 19 or 20. So this was something that really, and I think to this day, I still sort of look over my shoulder when I'm in large crowds, or if I hear certain things that maybe remind me of that day or something like that are there. But it was instantaneous. It wasn't something that took some time to develop over time. And literally the next day I had this phobia, right, of being in certain places, in certain spaces because of that trauma that I had experienced, which, like I said before, is completely unlike burnout, which is more of a process, which is a thing that happens.
Yeah, and I would add too is that secondary trauma can be very intrusive in terms of your thinking. Okay, so let's say that I feel like I'm so tired. Let me take a vacation and go to Hawaii, for example, to escape. Guess what? These thoughts follow you. These intrusive thoughts follow you. Okay, you may be swimming, sitting on the beach, and all that. You think about Johnny being molested by his police officer then. You see, And you imagine, how was it, him surviving that at the age of 8. And his dad told him not to tell anybody, because if you do, right, I would be arrested. Mom would lose a home. You would be in foster care. That is tremendous.
Yeah. One last thing, Dr. Nguyen. One way to also identify when you're experiencing some of this secondary and vicarious trauma is when you don't get a restful sleep. When typically your mind is able to relax when you sleep, but if you are experiencing that kind of trauma, your mind wanders when you sleep. Your mind continues to race, and you find yourself waking up, not even having a restful sleep. You can't sleep because your mind is constantly racing with all of these events and things that you're thinking about and things that you've experienced, and you're not able to turn that off. And a lot of people experience that, where they don't even get an opportunity to have a restful sleep because they've got so many different things that they've internalized that they're struggling with, that they can't even turn it off when they're sleeping.
Okay, so burnout is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion caused by long-term involvement in emotionally demanding situations. And believe it or not, burnout can occur when we do things that are not meaningful at all. Okay, so let's say that you are in a job that does not require your abilities, your gifts, your talents. That can also cause burnout. And at the same time, so much demands your time, your effort, that can cause burnout. Okay, so burnout may include exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced feeling of accomplishment. It can often be remedied by vacation or changing jobs.
Taking a look at some of the differences between compassion fatigue and burnout, as you can see, compassion fatigue focuses more on occupations dealing directly with trauma victims, as burnout can be found in all sorts of occupations. Compassion fatigue results from exposure to trauma and suffering, whereas burnout is typically from overworking oneself and occupational stress. Both have their place in the social service setting, and you'll see that. But I think the piece that separates these, when you think about compassion fatigue versus burnout, if you will, the thing that separates it is the fact of dealing directly with your client's trauma, right? If you've been in this field long enough and people find out what you do that are outside of this field, the first thing that you hear is, I can't imagine how you do that. That's got to be tough. How do you do that every day, right? You hear these comments from family, friends, complete strangers a lot of times. How do you do that work? I couldn't do it, right? Because they have seen images or they've heard of incidents or seen stories of child abuse and some of the things that they think are happening in our field, which some are true and some may be embellished, but they do lead to what we see now as compassion fatigue. And no other time in our history have we seen it more readily on display than we saw with the COVID shutdown, right? We saw people going through bouts of compassion fatigue and the frontline workers and things that they never had to see before, and the country really never had to see before, in terms of what that looked like firsthand for the first responders and all the people that were frontline workers that had to be in that space and didn't have an outlet. They had to be on. So you saw firsthand what compassion fatigue looked like. And then you saw the fallout where you had the burnout from people that were just in all kinds of other fields, like the explosion of for example, DoorDash and some of the other professions that people had to work around the clock to because people weren't leaving their homes, so they burnt out. And you saw this dichotomy that was happening right before our eyes that we had to sort of take notice of, and people that knew what was happening could explain it, but those that didn't just sort of brushed it off as, yeah, they're just not a good worker, or that person, really doesn't care about their job, or that person, how'd they get this job, or that person is really just sort of a slacker. When it's really, you're really watching people struggling with compassion fatigue and burnout. And when you don't have an outlet, and you don't, kind of like going back to the earlier conversations, when you don't have the resources to work through these things, and you haven't been given the tools to sort of sort this stuff out, what is a person left to do? And it manifests itself in a variety of different ways. And a lot of those things that we see now, where people just say, oh, well, that person just really had poor customer service. No, they're probably burnt out. They're really probably struggling with a lot of things that we wouldn't know, and really the poor customer service is really just a symptom of a much larger issue.
Okay, so any comments, questions, feedback? Okay.
Dr. Brown, there's a couple of things in the chat.
Okay.
Would you like to respond to, please?
Yeah, see, the first question, Dr. Nguyen, is do you think there is a higher prevalence of compassion fatigue with those who are highly sensitive persons?
I think that, the main thing is the professional helper who over-identifies with what the client is sharing. I mean, that has a great, potential for that impact. Because in essence, I mean, they see themselves in that client. If they're going through that phenomenon, going through that abuse. So I would say that, that is like the main thing, right? When that takes place, right? See your warning signs. See how you are after that session. And if you have like a colleague, a supervisor, process that, okay? And, to get the support that you need. Okay, and not to wait, the longer that you wait, right? The more images, the more I would say that crossing boundaries, not just in physical sense, but also your emotional crossing boundary. Okay, and that can make one very vulnerable. Okay, and just imagine that the next session that you see that client, right? I mean, definitely that there will be counter-transference taking place.
And I think my answer, Lacey, is I really do think that there is a higher prevalence in certain individuals. I think you could even make the case, and I think research would support that there might even be individuals that are predisposed to compassion fatigue based upon certain personality traits and things that they may have, like being really sensitive and hypersensitive, if you will, to their clients' needs and issues. And I think it sort of goes right into Eileen's question about why are there not greater pushes for social service agencies, schools, and spiritual groups to provide programs to keep people employed in these fields and able to do their jobs. Ministers deal with atrocious traumatic events, and so do teachers and social workers and other practitioners, and burnout and secondary trauma is rampant in these fields. I 100% agree. And I think there's no story that is probably more more of an example of this than a few years back. There was a pastor of a church that took his own life at his church, in his office, right? And no one got an opportunity to really obviously interview him to find out what he was struggling with. But clearly, if it had gotten to that point, there are some unknown and untold things that he was struggling with that were monumental, that he couldn't really see his way past and see his way out of. So I think you're absolutely right, Eileen, that there really does need to be a greater push for agencies to sort of front load this, because we talk about these things, but I think it's one of those things of they're presented sometimes as cautionary tales and things like just to be aware of and things to kind of look out for, as opposed to these conversations being like, this will happen to you and this is what you need to do when it does. Because if you're in this field long enough, it's inevitable.
Right. Yeah. And it cuts across all helping professions, from psychiatrists to psychologists, social workers. We are all impacted.
Correct.
All right, so let's look at research on secondary trauma here. Less literature on the topic of secondary trauma at this time compared to primary trauma, PTSD. Okay, but again, the question is who helps the helpers?
True.
So the helpers can work for the VA, for example, working with veterans with PTSD, working with clients who have lost loved ones. They also have PTSD. And the question is, who helps the helpers? And who listens to the helpers' stories? Okay. So a friend of mine, Lisa Dalton, she did her dissertation at the University of Texas, basically looking at in-home counselors, CPS workers. They are like the most impacted. Okay, and then comes the supervisors and then the administrators. Okay, so whoever is the closest to the clients will be mostly impacted by compassion fatigue, by secondary trauma. And let's say that if you do have a student, right, who has this, and they come to you to talk about these things, right, you are impacted as well, but not as much as they are, because they get to witness the raw emotions that their clients have exhibited. And for me personally, visually you can see the client in that state, in that vulnerable state, and that impacts you tremendously. Okay, you may not remember the things that they said, the words that they say, but you do remember how they look, how distraught they look. You carry that with you, even 5, 10, 20 years later. The research here reveals that personal limitations or flaws within oneself, resulting in thoughts. Something is wrong with me because I'm not strong enough. I'm not effective. Why am I thinking about these things? Why am I so upset? Okay. Why am I so preoccupied with these cases? And why can't I just shake them off? When I'm driving, when I'm doing my things and all that, I keep thinking about these cases. I'm too weak or incompetent to handle this. And I see a lot of students, do have these kinds of self-doubt. Maybe I'm not cut for this profession. I should have tried harder and put more effort. And I have become a bad person. Meaning that, let's say that we all hit our limit, right? And then let's say a client doesn't show up. In a way, we have that sigh of relief. And the student or the professional may think that, hey, I've entered this profession to help people. And when they don't show up for whatever reason, right, I feel that sigh of relief because, again, we have reached our limit. Okay. Stephen, anything that you would like to?
I think it's, and these are key examples of where these kinds of statements need to be reframed, right? And working with a professional that is experienced with vicarious trauma and burnout and compassion fatigue, are able to take these statements and reframe them, right? And more importantly, these are statements that are made from professionals that may not have the tools to sort of work through these things. Because I think it's been said that we're all a collection of experiences, and the true thing that separates us is how we're able to make sense of those experiences, right? So if you are coming out with something is wrong with me, or I'm weak because I'm unable to sort of sort through these things, then that is something that needs to be reframed and redirected, and have those energies put into a different place, so that you're able to understand, like I said before, that what's you're experiencing is abnormal. Your reactions are completely normal, and you need to normalize what your reactions are to these things, because that is really just showing that you are alive and that you have some humanity within you, and you're able to really see the humanity in these individuals and understand. Because I would be more concerned with the helping professional that saw these things and felt absolutely nothing, and could go on about their day as though they hadn't seen or experienced any of this stuff. That would be more concerning to me than a person that's actually struggling and dealing with these issues and somehow internalizing them. But it's just a way in how we're able to give one another the tools to not only reframe, but to empower ourselves to persevere through some of these traumatic events that we keep experiencing. So,
okay, so let's look at more research findings that overcome by grief and despair, disturbed sleep, anger, fear, feelings of insanity, loss of control, and even suicidal thoughts. So think about the implications that we have entered this helping profession. And because of all client stories, that sense of hopelessness, that makes us having these suicidal thoughts because of the injustice that we have seen.
and I think it's key when you talk about that loss of control. I think that's huge, because clients as well as individuals that don't feel like they have control over their environment are more helpless, right? And you don't see a way out. Most people, the first thing that they look to try to do is to figure out how they can control the situation or get control of the narrative. If you don't have, when you see that with definitely with foster children and families, right? They don't have control of their situation. They're usually the most vulnerable person in the house, and they don't have say over who's coming in and going in their room. They don't have say over when they may or may not be abused. They don't even have say over when they may eat. So a lot of things that you see in foster children, for example, or resource families, which is the new term, acting out, is because of that loss of control, or even a perceived loss of control. So that is even important with helping professionals. If we don't feel like we can affect change with a lot of these families, we feel helpless, right? And there is a sense of the same sort of loss of control that creeps in with social service practitioners and providers, where we struggle and are unable to see a way forward for those families and feel a sense of helplessness as a result.
Okay, can we be too compassionate? And it's just the root cause of fatigue. Okay, so think about that when you do see clients. Am I being too compassionate? Okay, compassion here, the emotion one experiences when witnessing another's suffering, and the desire to alleviate that suffering.
And sadly, I think we as a society are dealing with the loss of compassion, a lack of compassion, to be honest with you. I don't think it's the pendulum is going the other way. I think we have seen so much suffering and so much trauma out in the world that we've essentially you could make the case that a lot of people have become desensitized to the things that we see. It's not as traumatic an event for people as it probably should be, because we've been desensitized to some of the things that we see in the media and the images that we see on social media, for example, that creates this sort of perfect storm that I see playing out, in the media today. So I think we really need to kind of push to be even more compassionate if we could as a society. Obviously, our profession lends itself to us having that compassion, but you could make the case that we're sort of an anomaly in this world in terms of what we see and how we take home what we see versus maybe someone else that saw the same stimuli.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to look at the consequences now because time is running out. Okay. So if you look at both clinical and personal consequences, I mean, there are consequences to us having secondary trauma and how that impacts us, clinically speaking. For example, a clinician or trainee may deny or avoid discussing the client's traumatic experience. Because again, they are trying to protect themselves, the clinician, the helper, because they have heard so much. Their ears, their brains can no longer take in more traumatic content, storage. Or the next one is that the clinician or the trainee may probe too fast, too soon. Let's try to get this over with. And pushing the client to talk about things that they may not be ready. Tremendous implications. And they feel like, they are being traumatized again. Okay? Because how the clinician acts. But they may not realize that, hey, the clinician or the trainee may be having secondary trauma, and this is how they operate. But the main thing is that they say, this is not right. This is very harsh. This is unempathetic. Okay, if you look at personal consequences, feeling numb and avoid people generally. And if you have kids, they will detect this right away. You are not as fully present. You are emotionally preoccupied. You are absent. Okay? And that impacts your family life, your relationships with significant others and your children. Easily annoyed, trouble sleeping, trouble concentrating, thinking about trauma cases, often went away from work and helper feels upset when thinking about these cases. Okay, let's look at self-care here because we do have a few minutes left here. Dr. Brown.
I'll jump in. So when you're thinking about self-care, there are things that are considered modes of self-care. You see social, which deals with cultivating and maintaining close relationships, which are key. Most human beings are social, and there's even been brain research that shows that our brains are social. Brains crave a connection with other brains. So we are genetically predisposed to be social on some aspect. Obviously, the mental health aspect is another mode which deals with the activities that increase positive emotions. A lot of people don't take into account the physical mode, where nutrition and exercise are key. You have to be physically capable of enduring the things that we experience, and that starts with exercise and putting the right things in your body. There is an aspect of spiritual self-care where you need to nurture your spirit through meditation, as Dr. Nguyen alluded to, and you've got to sort of feed and nurture your own personal spirit to make sure that it is intact and able to help you withstand the trauma that you're likely to experience. but there's occupational if possible, and they have different types of cases for this. One of the things that we try to do in every facility that I've worked at is we put a meditation room in all of our offices that allow clinicians and staff to go into to sort of, have a small space where they could sort of unplug and just meditate and step away for a moment. Even if it was just in that meditation room where you may not have the opportunity to do that at your desk or in your office, but this room was set with aromatherapy, water therapy. They had light therapy where the room was dimly lit, and it was primarily designated as a space to step away when you needed that space. Time management is another mode that's huge. When you have to, and this is one of the things that being a part of a helping profession creates, not wanting to say no and ending up in many scenarios spreading yourself too thin because you're wanting to help everyone and you're wanting to, and I think I saw in the chat, what does compassion or having too much compassion look like? That's what it looks like for a lot of people, not being able to say no and wanting to help and do something for each and every person that you encounter, because you really just want to give of yourself so much. If the saying goes, give till it hurts. And that's what compassion fatigue looks like. You run and you run and you run. If you've ever seen a marathon runner at the end where they've sort of, their body just sort of gives out on them, that's kind of what compassion fatigue looks like. Because you've really just pushed yourself to the limit, and it's gonna manifest itself in some way. And typically it comes out physically.
Okay, all right, thank you so much for that. All right, so this is the last thing that we'll do. If you could settle and focus the mind, visualize, silently repeat phrases such as, I am doing my very best under these circumstances. Clients have their lives. I have my life. I do my very best to be of great service for my clients. Have a Teflon mind, letting experiences, feelings, thoughts come into your mind and slip right out. Control your attention, but not what you see. Push away nothing. Cling to nothing. Be like a guard at a palace gate, alert to every thought, feeling, and action that comes through the gate of your mind. Step inside yourself and observe. Watch your thoughts coming and going like clouds in the sky. Notice each feeling rising and falling like waves in the ocean. Notice exactly what you are doing. Notice what comes through your senses: eyes, ears, nose, skin, tongue, and smell the roses. So if you could engage in these self-care activities almost on like a daily basis, don't wait until your battery is running low. But this is like a lifestyle that we try to strive to achieve so that we can stay vibrant and effective, this helping profession for years to come. Okay, how I treat myself impacts you, and how I treat you impacts me. All right.
Dr. Nguyen, Dr. Brown, I'd just like to say thank you for this great presentation. I do just have a comment. As a counselor, educator, and clinician, I come across students who are so excited about the helping profession. They look forward to changing the world, to helping people get better. And I always see this in their faces as they matriculate through the programs that they enter into. And I just think to myself, oh boy, we know that it's not going to happen that way. And so I think the intentions of people coming into the profession I think it's great. I think that is what we need. I think though that we can change education the way we train them and the way we teach them to protect themselves, to protect their mind, bodies, and souls, because it's really, really important. And I don't know that we get it all the time in our curriculum. And even if we do get it, we may be so excited that we miss it. And so just as you both were speaking, I was thinking about 30 years ago in my master's program going along and the things that I thought I could do. And as 30 years later, what I know I couldn't do at the time. So it's amazing. I definitely think that to help the way people feel when they come across the trauma, the pain and suffering of others, how to protect ourselves is a must. It should be number one. And I think that supervision, consultation, and all of those pieces should play a part of professionals as we go through. So not just as a beginner, but as we just move along in our work that we do. So thank you for sharing this.
No, thank you. I think you're absolutely right. And I think we really need to be a lot more proactive as a profession. And I think what we've adopted is sort of this reactive sort of mindset. Like when you see these things and when you experience these things, these are what they are. And these are some things that you can do, as opposed to, as you alluded to, being more proactive and getting out in front of these things and letting them know that, hey, this is coming, instead of just adopting. Because I think we have professionals that were around us that saw us as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to take on the world, and they chose to adopt more of a wait and see perspective. Well, you'll see, it's just well, okay, well, I know what's coming, but you have to find out on your own. And I don't think that serves the profession very well at all. I think we really need to be a lot more proactive and let students know up front. This is where I think we're so scared to maybe scare students off, and we don't want to push them away, but we've got to be realistic about what they're likely to experience and how they can deal with it up front so that they don't get to that point.
Oh, wow. I hope you found this session by Drs. Nguyen and Brown as informative and helpful as I did. If you want to see the YouTube version of this presentation, please visit our Saybrook YouTube page. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you know what to do. Go to Apple, iTunes, or Spotify, leave that 5-star rating, and make sure to follow us. And also don't hesitate to leave a review on Apple. You can, of course, subscribe to us on most other major podcast platforms, including Google, Amazon, Stitcher, Pandora, and others. Remember to check out our show notes for today. And for more about our university, visit saybrook.edu, click on areas of study to find out an area that you might be interested in at the top of the page. And or just to learn more, go to our saybrook.edu/unbound, our digital magazine, where you can hear more from thought leaders like Drs. Nguyen and Brown, Drs. Moss, and many others. Or you can just simply Google Saybrook University Unbound. All right, everyone, take good care. Have a great week and a great weekend. We'll see you soon.